It was supposed to be a fresh start, an affordable room in a quiet neighborhood, a place to rest while starting a new job. But when the door opened, a strange feeling washed over me. The house smelled off, like something hidden was waiting. The decorations, the notes, the unsettling feeling of being watched with the beer. What would you do if you found out that someone was tracking your every move, every conversation, every breath? As I walked through the house, something felt wrong, but I ignored it. Until one night, I found something that would change everything. Stay with me as we unravel the mystery behind a room for rent and the eerie obsession that lurked within. But before we get lost in the shadows, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out our chilling upcoming episodes. If you're enjoying our eerie stories, leave a like, drop a comment, and share the terror with others. And for even more eerie content, follow us on social media. Keep the fear alive. Thanks for joining me on this spooky journey. Now, let's dive into the nightmare. A few years ago, I was in my early 20s and living in a small town. I had just moved to a new city for a job opportunity and needed a place to stay while I searched for something more permanent. Renting a room in a shared house seemed like an affordable option, so I turned to Craigslist. I found a few listings that seemed decent, but one in particular caught my attention. It was a cheap room in a house in a quiet neighborhood with a promise of a laid-back, friendly living situation. The post was written by a woman named Sarah, and the photos she posted of the house seemed nice, simple, clean, with a spacious backyard and a cozy living room. The price was more than reasonable for the area, and the location was convenient for work. I texted her, and after a few exchanges, she invited me to come by and see the room. When I arrived at the house, I was a little surprised by the condition of the exterior. It was more run down than the pictures had suggested, but still it wasn't horrible. I rang the doorbell and Sarah opened the door. She was in her late 30s, with a warm smile and a friendly demeanor. She led me inside and I was immediately hit by the smell of something odd. It wasn't offensive, just off. The house was mostly quiet with some light music playing in the background. Sarah gave me a quick tour. The room I would be renting was actually pretty nice. It had a big window, decent closet space, and a small desk. Everything seemed in order. As we walked through the house, though, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. The living room was filled with weird, eclectic decorations, mostly odd sculptures and framed photos of people I didn't recognize. The house itself felt strangely empty, like it hadn't been lived in for a while. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Sarah seemed nice and the room was a good deal. We sat down in the kitchen to talk about the terms. That's when things started to feel a little off. She started talking about herself, how she worked from home, how she didn't have a lot of friends, and how she was hoping to find someone low maintenance to share the space. Then she started asking me personal questions, way too personal. Do you drink? Do you smoke? Are you into yoga or meditation? It felt less like small talk and more like she was trying to size me up, but I shrugged it off, figuring she was just being thorough. I agreed to rent the room, and we set a move-in date for the following week. I signed a basic agreement, no big deal, and handed over the first month's rent. The first few days living there were uneventful, but I quickly began to feel a sense of unease. Sarah was always around, always in the kitchen or living room, and I started to notice that she would keep the door to her bedroom cracked open just enough for me to see her sitting there, staring at her computer screen. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming she was just working. But then she started to leave notes for me. At first they were harmless enough, little things like, please keep the kitchen clean or don't forget to take out the trash. But then they started getting a little more intense. I found one taped to the fridge that read, please don't be late coming home tonight. I get nervous when I'm alone. I thought it was odd, but I didn't say anything. Things escalated over the next few days. I came home from work one evening to find the door to my room wide open. Sarah was sitting on my bed, reading a book. She acted completely normal, like it was no big deal, but I was freaked out. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just told her I needed some space and closed the door. That's when I started noticing even more oddities, like the fact that my stuff was sometimes moved around, just slightly. My toiletries would be shuffled, or my shoes were out of place. The real tipping point came a few days later. I had planned to stay late at work, so I texted Sarah to let her know I'd be home late. When I finally arrived around midnight, I found the house dark and silent. I was exhausted, so I just went to my room, intending to crash for the night. But as I was about to lie down, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A small notebook was on my bed, wedged between the sheets. I opened it. Inside, it was filled with pages and pages of writing in Sarah's handwriting. At first, I thought it was just a journal or a sketchbook, but as I flipped through the pages, I realized it was all about me. Every page was filled with notes about my habits, my routines, even things I'd mentioned in passing conversations, how often I went to the gym, what I ate for lunch, what time I came home from work. I was in shock. My stomach dropped and I couldn't breathe. Had Sarah been watching me? Had she been tracking my every move? I immediately packed a bag and left the house that night. I texted Sarah the next morning, telling her I was no longer interested in living there and would be leaving. She replied almost immediately with a single text. "I knew you'd leave. You were always too perfect to be real." I never heard from her again after that. I got out of there as fast as I could and found a different place to live. To this day, I have no idea what was going on with Sarah, but I never rented from Craigslist again. The whole experience still haunts me. It felt like I was being watched the whole time, and I'll never forget the feeling of seeing my life written down in that notebook. In the summer of 2019, I took a job as a caretaker for an old, rustic cabin in a remote area of rural Wisconsin. It was a family friend's property and they needed someone to keep an eye on it while they were away. Eager for a break from city life, I welcomed the solitude and the chance to spend my days in nature. The nearest neighbor was a mile down a winding dirt road, and the forest surrounding the cabin was dense and unwelcoming, with towering pines and thick underbrush. The first week was peaceful. I settled into a routine of cleaning, organizing, and exploring the trails that snaked through the woods. The cabin had its quirks, creaky floorboards and rattling windows, but I felt at home amidst the calmness. Evenings were spent on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. But as night fell, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. The woods, once serene, felt alive with whispers and rustles that seemed to echo from the shadows. I attributed it to my overactive imagination, the result of too many horror movies. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. One night, while I sat on the porch, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. It was just a dark silhouette, but something about it sent chills down my spine. My heart raced, and I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern any details. But no features were discernible, just an inky black shape against the backdrop of trees. I forced myself to look away, convincing myself it was merely a trick of the light. Each night after that, the figure returned, always in the same spot, always motionless. I found myself staring out into the woods, anticipating its arrival. I'd catch glimpses of it just before dusk, standing silently, an unsettling presence in the twilight. As time passed, it became a part of my routine. I began to dread nightfall, but the figure never approached, only watched. One evening, I resolved to confront it. Armed with a flashlight and a brave face, I stepped onto the porch. The figure stood in its usual spot, barely distinguishable in the encroaching darkness. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. The figure remained still. Gathering my courage, I took a few tentative steps toward it. As my flashlight beam pierced the dark, the figure seemed to dissolve, blending back into the shadows as if it had never existed. A cold wave of panic washed over me, and I sprinted back inside, locking the door behind me. I felt a primal urge to flee, but I knew I had to stay until morning. The next day, I packed my things and resolved to leave. As I stepped outside, I noticed something strange. A series of small footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the cabin door. They were too large for a child, yet too small for an adult. My heart sank as dread settled in. Who had been watching me all along? Just as I was about to head to my car, a sound made me freeze. A faint giggle carried through the trees. I looked around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. It was then that I remembered a story my friend had told me about the family who used to own the cabin. They had a daughter who had gone missing years before, and despite searches, she was never found. My stomach twisted at the thought. I could feel eyes on me, the forest holding its breath. I bolted to my car and sped down the dirt road, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure trailing behind. Months later, I received a call from my friend. He had decided to check on the cabin after hearing about my experience. When he arrived, he found the door wide open and the interior in disarray, furniture overturned, belongings scattered. The police were called, but there were no signs of forced entry. What they did find was a small, tattered teddy bear at the foot of the porch. It looked strikingly familiar, like a toy that belonged to the missing girl. That night, unable to sleep, I kept replaying the events in my mind. I remembered the feeling of being watched, the dark figure, and the footprints. I couldn't shake the sense that the woods were hiding something dark and sinister. I never returned to that cabin. The once idyllic retreat became a haunting memory, a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. I often think of the whispers in the woods and the shadowy figure that lurked just beyond the trees. It was a presence that reminded me of the unknown, of secrets that lie hidden beneath the surface of the familiar. Sometimes I wonder what else is watching from the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to wander too close. Let me take you back to December 29th, 1999. I was just a teenager, and that night, my best friend Olivia and I were buzzing with excitement. We were celebrating her 16th birthday with a sleepover that we had been planning for weeks. We kicked off the evening at our favorite local pizzeria, indulging in cheesy slices and giggling about everything from school gossip to our crushes. It felt like we had all the time in the world, and we couldn't wait to dive into our typical sleepover shenanigans. As the hours rolled by, we settled in for a night filled with laughter, snacks, and movies. We were wrapped up in our own little world, completely unaware of the dark shadow lurking just outside our bubble. Around 5:30 a.m., I remember being jolted awake by the sound of sirens. Confused and groggy, I glanced at Olivia, who was still asleep, oblivious to the chaos unfolding. A motorist had spotted flames shooting from Olivia's house and called the fire department. My heart sank as I listened to the distant sounds of fire trucks racing through our quiet neighborhood. When the firefighters arrived and battled the blaze, they discovered something far worse than flames. They found Olivia's mum, Diane, brutally taken from this world. The news sent shockwaves through our community, leaving everyone in disbelief and horror. But what struck me to my core was that neither Olivia nor I were anywhere to be found. Panic surged through me when I heard that Emma's car was still parked in the driveway, keys dangling in the ignition, suggesting she had tried to escape. The initial investigation turned its gaze to Olivia's dad, Richard, but my heart shattered when they found him among the ruins. It was clear that something much darker had transpired that night. The fear in our town escalated. Families locked their doors, terrified of the unknown. I watched as the community united in grief, candles lit in vigil for the Parker family, but I felt an emptiness growing inside. Days turned into weeks, and despite our desperate cries for answers, there were none. Each passing day felt heavier, and I could see the hope fading from Olivia's family and my own as the case went cold. Years slipped by, and I found myself accepting the grim reality of the situation. Then, unexpectedly, 2 incarcerated men claimed to know what happened that fateful night. They made chilling confessions, saying they had abducted Olivia and me, driven by twisted motives related to drug debts that had nothing to do with us. My heart raced as I listened to their stories, but despite extensive searches, nothing was found to support their claims. It turned out they were just seeking attention, playing with our lives from behind bars. In the aftermath of it all, questions began to surface about how the local police had conducted the investigation. The Parker family had a tumultuous history with law enforcement, leading to tension and distrust within the community. I could see how the police's failure to act quickly compounded the heartbreak and fear. Finally, in April 2018, a glimmer of hope emerged. I vividly remember the moment I received the news that a man named Walter Simmons was about to be charged with multiple counts related to our case. My emotions were a whirlwind of relief and sorrow. While it felt like justice might finally be served, the weight of everything that had happened lingered heavily. It became clear that Olivia and I had been victims of a truly horrifying ordeal, subjected to unimaginable horrors at the hands of those who reveled in their sadistic desires. In July 2020, Walter Simmons accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to being an accessory in the murders. While this marked a kind of closure, it felt woefully inadequate given the gravity of the situation. The scars from that night would never fully heal, and I realized the memory of Olivia would forever haunt me, a constant reminder of how quickly life can change and how darkness can creep into the most unsuspecting places. The community still feels the echoes of that tragedy. Families have grown closer, supporting one another through the lingering pain, but the shadows remain. Each year, we gather to remember Olivia and honor the life she should have lived. We share stories, laughter, and tears, trying to keep her spirit alive in our hearts. As for me, I've learned to navigate the world with a heightened sense of awareness. I cherish every moment with my loved ones and advocate for safety in our community. While the wounds from that night may never fully heal, I carry Olivia's memory with me, reminding myself that life is fragile and unpredictable. It's a haunting lesson in the darkness that can exist just beneath the surface of our everyday lives, urging us to hold our loved ones a little tighter and to always seek justice for those who have been wronged. I don't know what to think anymore. I've never told anyone about this, not even my closest friends. But I need to get it off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of what happened, though I doubt it will. It all started last week. My wife, Sarah, and I were having a quiet night in. We hadn't been able to spend much time together recently. She'd been working long hours at the hospital, and I was usually busy with my own stuff. So when she suggested cooking dinner at home, I thought it would be a perfect chance to reconnect. She decided on a roast chicken, her favorite. I could smell it cooking as I entered the house after work. Everything felt normal, comforting. A soft humming floated through the kitchen. I kissed her on the cheek, asking how her day had been. She smiled, said it was fine, and gestured to the table where she'd already set the plates. As I sat down, I couldn't help but notice something strange. There was an extra place setting at the table. "Are we expecting company?" I asked. She looked at me with a soft, blank expression. "Oh, that? I just thought it would be nice to have a full table tonight," she said, her tone so casual that I didn't think much of it. I let it slide. It was just the two of us, but she'd set the table for 3. Maybe it was some quirky thing she'd decided on a whim, and I didn't want to question it too much. But then, as we ate, things got weird. For one, Sarah was unusually quiet. She usually had a lot to say. She loved to talk about her patients, how they were doing, or about the latest project at work. Tonight, though, she just chewed her food slowly, staring at the empty chair across from her. Every time I'd try to make conversation, she'd give short, distracted responses. Her gaze would drift back to that empty seat. At one point, I asked her, "What's going on, babe? You seem a little off tonight." She didn't look at me. She just stared at the plate in front of her and said, "I'm just tired." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. This wasn't like her. Then the doorbell rang. I stood up, confused. Who could it be? Sarah didn't seem to be expecting anyone. I opened the door, but no one was there. Nothing, just the empty porch. But when I turned to go back inside, my heart stopped. The third plate. It was gone. I blinked, certain I was losing my mind. There was no plate, no silverware, nothing. Just the 2 settings exactly as they should be. But it had been there a minute ago. I swear I saw it. I walked back into the kitchen where Sarah was sitting at the table, staring at the same spot she'd been fixated on all night. When I asked her where the third plate went, she didn't answer right away. She just looked at me with that strange, soft expression. Then she said, "Don't worry about it." The guest left. "You're with me now." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My stomach turned. The guest? But before I could ask her to explain, the doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I bolted to the door, heart hammering in my chest. When I opened it, there was still no one there, just the silence of the night. I closed the door, turning back to Sarah, my mind spinning. And when I looked at the table, the third plate was back. I couldn't process what was happening. I'd heard the bell ring, I'd seen the plate disappear, and now it was back. Sarah was still staring at the spot across from her, not acknowledging me at all. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and texted my friend Jason, asking if I was just losing it. But before I could send the message, the lights flickered. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from behind me. I spun around. The empty chair was now occupied. There was a figure sitting there, someone I didn't recognize. It was a woman, but her features were blurry, distorted, like looking at a reflection in dirty glass. I could make out her face, but it wasn't clear enough to see who she was. She wore an old-fashioned dress, and her hair was tied up in a tight bun. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, perfectly still. But I could sense something wrong, something off. I froze. Sarah didn't even flinch, she just smiled, that same calm, knowing smile she always had, as if the woman sitting there was the most normal thing in the world. "This is our guest," she said softly. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the chair, the woman, the unholy sense of dread filling my chest. The figure didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at Sarah, almost like she was waiting for something. It was like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, and I could feel the walls closing in. The woman at the table didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She was too still. "Sarah," I managed to choke out. "Who is she?" Sarah glanced at me, her expression as serene as ever. "She's been here for a long time. I've been waiting for her to come back." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. I turned to the doorway, desperate to get out. "I need to go," I whispered. I need to go." But Sarah didn't let me leave. She reached out, her hand cold and unyielding, grasping my wrist. "No," she said, her voice unnaturally firm. "We're not finished yet." I yanked my arm away, stumbling backward, but the door wouldn't open. The doorknob refused to turn as though it was stuck in place. The woman at the table remained silent, watching me with unblinking eyes, as if she was waiting for something, or someone, to make the next move. Finally, the lights flickered again. The door opened with a quiet click. I ran out of that house faster than I'd ever run in my life, and I didn't stop until I was a block away, gasping for breath. My phone was still in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to check it. I didn't want to know what was happening anymore. I didn't want to go back. Have you ever faced something truly terrifying? Eerie Shadows wants to hear your story. Share your chilling experiences with us on Reddit, and together we'll uncover the eerie mysteries lurking in the shadows. If you'd like to support the channel and help us create even more terrifying content, consider checking out our Patreon or Ko-fi. Your support helps us keep the horror alive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more bone-chilling tales like this one. Stay tuned for the next eerie episode.